Kokoda Tato, welcome back to the Wargaming Den. Another little solo game using my own rules for you today. It's the third battle of my Kokoda campaign and the first battle for the village of Kokoda and the airfield. The battle actually took place on the 28th, 29th of July 1942. Let's take a look at the background. Okay, so just for a wee bit of background, after the Battle of Oivi that took place here, the Australians continued retreating, and they made their way back to Kokoda, where the airstrip was, and realizing that the Japanese weren't advancing quickly, they reinforced from Daniki, which is down here, and reoccupied Kokoda village. The troops again were mainly troops from the 39th Militia Battalion, but there was also men from the Papuan Infantry Battalion, I think it is, the Australian New Guinea Admin Unit, Royal Papuan Constabulary, and some signallers from the 30th Brigade HQ. Whereas the Japanese, it was their vanguard advancing up the trail, and it consisted of about 200 troops from the 144th Infantry Regiment under a Captain Tetsuro Ogawa. Okay, so on the right here, we've got a map taken out of David Cameron's The Battles of Kokoda Plateau book, 2020. Highly recommend that. Very, very well written and interesting read. And this shows the direction of the main Japanese attacks that took place against B Company. So 1, 2, 3, and here's location. Lieutenant Colonel Owen, who was in charge, took command. He got shot in the head, I think, while trying to move around amongst the troops. I think someone may have even told him to get down not long beforehand, that there were snipers about, but he was shot and died of his wounds sometime later. Got the regimental aid post with Doc Vernon, who is well and truly one of the legends of the campaign, a Gallipoli veteran. He was about 60 years old. He marched up the trail with the troops because he realized that the soldiers were going to need medics up near the front. He was also very concerned about the well-being of the Papuan labourers who were carrying all the supplies up, and did quite a lot to support them. I think I read one account where he went out one night and came back a while later, and they said, "Oh, where's your blanket?" And he had given it away to a Papuan porter who was dying of pneumonia and wasn't going to last till morning, but he wanted to make this guy's last hours as comfortable as possible. Very brave, very generous man. He was also almost stone deaf. So in, I think, the Battle of Daniki or Isurava, he was busy operating, and occasionally they'd have to shine the light so he could see what he was doing, and that would attract Japanese machine gun fire. He wasn't aware of that because he couldn't hear it. And also when he was ordered not to go up the track, his deafness played quite a part in his not understanding his orders and moving up. So fascinating character, and there's lots has been written about him, so well worth reading up about him. And what I've also got here, this is the cool thing with modern wargaming, is I just took a screenshot of Kokoda today from Google Earth. So here we've got the airport, the runway, the airstrip, pretty much where it was located back in the day, and then we've got the township there, and you can see the road. So this road track over here is actually the Kokoda Trail by the looks of it, and then it's winding its way back this way to Daniki, and also there is the track heading south. And I cut off this map, but down here was coconut plantations, and this is coconut plantations. When the Australians retreated, the Japanese were overrunning their positions. They escaped through the plantations in this direction. So that's our real resources, wargamers, we didn't have even 10 years ago, which is pretty cool. And now what we've got here is a pretty famous photo of Kokoda village in I think it's July 1942. So within a month of the battle taking place. So here's the village up here. It's on a little bit of a rise. There's the airstrip along there. Here's the Kokoda track winding its way through the village. And then down this way is Deniki and Port. Oh, sorry, that's a Kokoda Buna track. Oh, yeah, I guess that's a Kokoda track. And then Deniki is down this way. So the battle. So what I've done is I've just realigned that Google map so that it's facing the same as this map. You get a good idea of how tall the peaks are around, because this is high up in the mountain pass, which is why the airstrip was so important. And quite interesting, later on when the Australians come back down the track, they use the airstrip, and they actually built another supply dump further in the mountains, a Golly, something like that. But the Japanese never used aircraft to supply, so all their supplies were coming up from Gona and Buna by foot, being carried by either Japanese troops or the Papuan labourers, many of whom eventually tired of the ill treatment and escaped and fled into the jungle. But yeah, as I said, there's the mountains around. This has been reorientated, so it's facing the same direction. So basically, in the battle, Japanese were attacking from this direction, and that's down here is where the coconut plantations that the Australians escaped through, and then you can see there's a bit of a creek running through this way as well. So yeah, very handy resource for wargaming. Google Earth. Not many things I thank Google for, but there is one of them. Let's just have a quick look at the table that I've developed for the battle. So on the top corner you can see the map taken from Cameron's book, and here's my interpretation of it. So I've got the jungle along there. This is Kokoda airstrip, and here's the trail that goes to Yoda, and then the road to Deniki, and the road to Oivi, and then to Gona and Buna, eventually Wairopi, etc., etc. So just really cut it down to make it a manageable little game. It's on a 4x4 table. Japanese have to capture this little shack here, or break the Australians, and the Australians are just trying to hold just a couple of platoons each side. So as you can see here in the actual battle, the Japanese attacked through this way. They also came through from just above the airstrip up here, and they also attacked through here as well. But I'm just going to have two platoons, so we'll assume that the action around here occurs off table, just because it's only, given the table size, only going to be a couple of platoons each side. But I think this is shrunk down and gives a reasonable representation of the terrain. As you can see here, you can just make out the plateau that Kokoda village is located on, and then down here to Deniki is also where all the coconut plantations were, which the Australians retreated through when they finally pulled back. But on to the game. Again, just little forces for this one, just two platoons representing B Company of the 39th Militia Battalion, and also a couple of platoons representing the company of the 144th Japanese Regiment that was leading the advance on Port Moresby. Right, let's have a quick look at deployment. Japanese start with 7 units on table, 2 scouts, 1 unit stays in reserve. The Aussies get 1 reserve, 2 units in ambush, and 5 scouts on the table. And this is what things look like after deployment. So Japanese are just coming on through the jungle. So first platoon is on this side of the creek, second platoon on the other side. They've got 2 scouts, 1 per platoon. This platoon here has 2 squads and the grenadier squads on table. The other platoon has all 3 of its infantry squads and its grenadier squad on table. There's the HQ. So the Aussies have kind of put a ring around the plateau that the village is located on, and they've thrown 1 scout team forward as well. So on to turn number 1. Turn 1, not a great deal of action. Japanese just had 6 orders, so they basically just advanced through the jungle to the edge of the jungle area. Everything else is pretty much open ground in this game. This is the airfield along here. The Aussies deployed an ambush, fired and killed a team over there, then used their platoon HQ order to fire a second time and did 2 more casualties to the Japanese, and they stayed on table. Just deployed another section over here who failed to spot the Japanese advancing there, and just pulled back some scout patrols. So on to turn 2. Turn 2. Japanese went first. They didn't have a great deal of orders. They advanced along the edge of the airfield, took some fire coming in, lost the team. Their Juki medium machine gun opened up as well, trying to pin the Australians on the hill up there without success. They just held on the side. In their turn, the Australians fired down, killed the remainder of that Japanese squad that had been there. Then Japanese used a reaction fire from the squad there. Didn't cause any damage. The Australians saved everything. So not a great deal of action, but on to turn 3. Right, so just a bit of an overview before I do move on to turn 3. So here's the Japanese 2 squads making the way around the Australian flanks if they can. Lost a couple of teams here. The Australians lost a team up there, and that Japanese squad was eliminated. So currently the Japanese are sitting on 7 losses, which 1 is a fubar. I'm not sure what I'll call a fubar, but it's -1 on the orders from here on, and the Australians have only lost the 1. So on to the next turn. Right, so the Japanese section or squad charged up here using a second order. So that's a HQ order. So the Japanese HQ moved into command radius. Then once this unit was pinned, the Japanese launched an assault. Let's see how that went. Japanese won the assault. They killed a team. The Australians retreated, the survivors, and they rolled a 2 for their morale check, which would have broken the section, but the platoon commander's right there, and he used his platoon command reroll to reroll that, and the Australians stayed on the table. The rest of the Japanese turn has mainly been covering fire with the rifle squad here, the Juki down here, and the knee mortars. Fired a couple of times, no casualties on the Aussies. The Aussies fired back at the knee mortars. Fired first, killed 1 team, and then the Juki and then the rifle squad opened up. They killed a team of the Australians and have now pinned that section. Otherwise, the Japanese squad is starting to work its way around the flanks here as we move on to the Australian turn 3. So in their turn, the Australians just rallied this section and the section in the trenches over there. A combat patrol or a scout moved back out of range of the Japanese and deployed their final section to help support. And then over here, similar thing, retreated with a scout and then deployed a section into the building there. And that is the end of turn 3. Okay, before we turn on to turn 4, just a quick overview. So here's the Juki been firing up, covering fire. The other Juki's there doing the same. Japanese lost a knee mortar team over here. They're infiltrating around the edge of the Australian positions on that flank. This is where the assault went in, captured the first foxholes, and that's the Australian section that's been driven back, and the other Australian sections deployed there and into that building as well. And this Japanese squad has continued to try and work around the flanks. The Japanese also moved their platoon HQ forward, which is this guy here, and deployed a another scout here so that potentially they could deploy their last squad off that in the next turn. But they have breached the Australian positions. Can the Australians launch a counterattack to drive the Japanese back? We will see on turn 4. Turn 4, the Aussies went first. They fired at the Japanese in the foxholes, didn't cause any casualties. Japanese fired back, the Australians saved. The section that had been here ran into that building, and the platoon HQ retreated before they were overrun. The section here fired down at the Japanese and killed a stand over there, and the other scout patrol retreated. So the Australians are grimly holding on, but they've only got one order left for reactions as we move to the Japanese turn. Successful turn for the Japanese. They're reinforcing the squad that's taken the foxholes. Fired a couple of times at those Aussies, but the Aussies saved nearly everything, but they did get wavered at the end. No casualties caused on the Australians in the building there. But over this side, fired up at the section in the building, killed 2 stands, and then let rip with the Juki and killed another 2 stands. So took out that section. These guys had been fired back at, but no casualties. And then the last squad in the tree line or near enough killed a section here, or a stand here, but didn't pin that Australian section. So the Australians are in a bit of trouble. They've taken 9 losses now, which is nearly 2 FUBARs. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? They've taken 8, sorry, and the Japanese remain on 9 losses. So it is very close. Successful turn for the Japanese. I don't think the Australians actually caused any casualties. They did save quite a few, make quite a few cover saves, but at the end they lost a stand here. They lost that whole section in that building thanks to fire from that squad and the Juki over here. They've pushed a squad forward across the creek to help support the guys that are in the forward foxholes, and the final squad from this platoon deployed off their scout team as well. So Japanese are now trying to break through here and are mainly using covering fire from the other platoon. But we'll see how turn 5 works out. But the Australians are in a bit of bother. It is 9 losses to 8 so far. The Australians will break if they lose 10. and the Japanese are going to break if they lose 15. So on to turn number 5. Okay, the Australians got the initiative. They only had 5 orders, but the Japanese only had, no, they had 6 orders. Japanese only had 4 or 5. So the Australians went first. They fired with the section here to try and pin these guys so that this section in the building could assault. They didn't do any casualties. Then the Japanese used a reaction fire and killed one of the Australian stands there, put the Aussies on to 9. Then this section advanced, fired at the Japanese and the foxholes, didn't cause any casualties, but again, a react fire from these Japanese killed an Australian team, put the Australians on 10 losses, which made for a comfort group morale check, which they failed, and the Australians have had enough and withdraw from Kokoda, leaving the Japanese in control of Kokoda airfield as the campaign continues. And there you have it. So a loss here and a loss here broke the Australians' morale, and they retreated back to Taniki. But another enjoyable little skirmish style game based somewhere in Kokoda in 1942. Now let's have a quick look at what actually happened. So the Australians had, on learning that Kokoda was left empty under Colonel Owen, had gone back to the village to try and secure it and hopefully be able to use the air strip to get reinforcements. During the afternoon, 2 US transport aircraft arrived carrying reinforcements from the 49th Battalion, but they didn't land as the pilots believed the situation was too risky, so headed back to Port Moresby instead. Must have been very discouraging for the soldiers defending the village at the time. Sometime during the afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Owen was badly wounded. He was shot just above the eye or the temple, and taken to Doc Vernon, and Doc soon realised that Owen was dying and there's nothing that could be done. Japanese pressure continued on the Australians during the evening and night, and a big assault went in the early hours of the 29th, and after about an hour of heavy fighting, the Australians withdrew from the village. Lieutenant Colonel Owen, who was near death by this stage, was left behind after being made as comfortable as possible. His remains were discovered when the Australians returned a few days later, and the survivors fell back to Diniki. One of the interesting outcomes was there was a section of soldiers from maybe 10th or 12th platoon led by Corporal Markham, and they were dug in below the lip of the plateau, and the other Aussies had tried to let them know that they were going to be withdrawing but couldn't make contact with them and assumed that they'd been overrun. Eventually, though, Markham and his soldiers realised that they were surrounded by Japanese and had basically been abandoned, so decided to bluff their way out. So they stood up and just casually walked in single file their way through the Japanese positions into the rubber plantation beyond. Must have been extremely stressful, expecting to be recognised and open fire on at any moment, but they eventually slipped into the jungle, skirted around Japanese positions, and made contact with the Australians maybe in the early hours of the next morning, and made it back to the Australian positions, which must have been a very harrowing experience. But those kind of things happened time and time again on the Kokoda Trail. But for me, that's all I've got time for today. and I will do another battle in the next wee while. But until then, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, ka kite anō. Take care.